Hello everybody, the Nameless Narcissist here once again. Simple man, diagnosed with MPD, giving you the facts of narcissistic personality disorder and things that go on in my head. If you like this video, please like, comment, and subscribe, but keep in mind, I am no clinician, I can only speak to my own experiences. So, I decided to have an undertaking where I am going to try and make a more realistic definition and model of narcissism than currently is available. Because there is literally no agreed upon definition of anything about narcissism. It's like, yeah, we know narcissists exist, and that is all we know, right? You got your communal, your vulnerable, your grandiosity, you got healthy narcissism, pathological narcissism, you got the whole fucking shebang. Everybody has their own opinions. So hell, why can't I have mine? This is going to be mainly based off the research I've done and off of just personal experience and stuff like that. So I want to start out with the model of healthy to pathological narcissism, because I heavily disagree with most of the how people conceptualize this. People think that healthy narcissism, and then that's on a scale to pathological. I think there's some implications here that I really do not like, because it basically goes low self-esteem, like healthy self-esteem, healthy narcissism, pathological narcissism, and then subclinical narcissism, right? That implies that narcissists actually love themselves. I think it's pretty well agreed upon that narcissists are trying to defend with their grandiosity against these feelings of inferiority, of worthlessness, of self-hate. And to say that pathological narcissism is an extreme of healthy narcissism, I think is very misleading. That would imply that narcissists are like so happy with themselves and they're arrogant and domineering just because they love themselves so much, which is or because I guess they would feel like they deserve to. I feel like the only real argument you could make for pathological extreme healthy narcissism would be factor one psychopaths, because they actually do genuinely believe in their grandiosity. They know that they're better than other people, or at least they think that they're better. They genuinely think they're better than other people. So I have a different model for this. I think that I have like two things in mind. Either there should be a scale of healthy narcissism that is parallel to a scale of pathological narcissism, right? Like healthy narcissism, low self-esteem to genuinely good self-love and self-confidence. And then pathological narcissism would go from just like, no narcissistic defenses. So you'd probably be like pretty good self-esteem, right? And then to pathological narcissism is all the narcissistic defenses and extreme self-hate. Or alternatively, if we want to stick to the healthy to pathological stuff, I would say it would go from like extreme self-esteem, right? Maybe factor one psychopathy, to really high, very high, like arrogance, right? To healthy narcissism, healthy self-love, to like, normal self-esteem, to low self-esteem. And then beyond low self-esteem is where I think that you would be getting into pathological narcissism. Like at the low self-esteem is where those narcissistic defenses start being a thing, and then keep going, and then eventually you hit pathological. Now, also, the spectrum of narcissism in general, because people talk like, oh, narcissism is a spectrum, and they kind of base that off of like, oh, you have no narcissism, pathological narcissism, to malignant narcissism. And I think this is an oversimplification. Cluster B personality disorders, like it's always going to be a mix match and hodgepodge of all traits from every single one. So I have something basically, and it's a really bad drawing of it, but a triangle that basically encapsulates narcissistic personality disorder, borderline, and antisocial. And instead of having basically scales of how the degrees of narcissism, I'm saying we got pathological narcissism, and then the scale should be how close to borderline they are, right? Because I have severe borderline traits and some antisocial ones, and you can't really be in a position where you have cluster B personality disorder with no traits from anywhere else. So basically, if you're here at the top, you're just pure narcissist. You have self-esteem fluctuations, you compensate with arrogance, I would say you would be in a primarily grandiose presenting way, but I would say it might be even 50-50 of fluctuating between the two. You rely on others to define yourself, etc., etc. Then, as you travel down towards the malignant side, the more ASPD traits you get, and then that overlap would be a comorbidity. that's where you're going to get more of some malignant narcissism going on, like some domineering aspect. And like I would say that's a little bit simplistic too, because you also need paranoid traits and egocentric sadism, neither of which are included in narcissistic personality disorder in the diagnostic criteria or antisocial, though those may be associated features that are more common with those pathologies. I'm not sure, I haven't done necessary research. And then I would say that on the other hand of things, you have the scale to borderline. And I would say that would be even the less cohesive those grandiose defenses are, is the more you're going to go towards borderline, because borderline is actually very strongly associated with vulnerable narcissism. So the more you go down that, probably the more vulnerable presenting you're going to be, and also probably the more self-esteem fluctuations you're going to get. And I would also argue for more unstable identity, more angry outbursts, which makes sense, right? With those self-esteem fluctuations, if you're always crashing, you're going to have anger defenses pop up all the time. And then, of course, you could just be in the middle where you're just going to be a really, really problematic person, I would say. Like, I can't imagine what somebody with BPD, NPD, and ASPD, all as comorbidities, I can't even comprehend what kind of person that would be. That sounds terrifying. But yeah, this is kind of the model that I like for for the spectrum of narcissism, so to speak. I think the only limitation of this is that I guess I would argue for like another scale too, like a parallel one, kind of to like, for like the level of functioning, right? If you want to go off the psychodynamic thing, we could have neurotic functioning, which is probably the best level of functioning, is the best level of functioning, then borderline functioning, not borderline personality disorder, but the level of functioning, then psychotic level of functioning. So maybe that could be another scale to kind of complement this a little bit. Now, finally, I want to propose a actual subtypes of NPD and a functional diagnostic criteria. And these are the things that I think are the core of narcissism. Is, first of all, and like this is somewhat based off of research, somewhat based off of personal experience. For example, I read a study talking about the remission rate of narcissistic personality disorder, and the least likely trait to go into remission is need for admiration, right? Because we're always going to need other people to prop up our self-esteem so we don't hate ourselves as much. So I think that really is the kind of core symptom of narcissism. That's the thing that's going to be really hard to get rid of. So I think that should be the first diagnostic criteria, a constant need for reassurance, validation, admiration, to prop up unstable to prop up our, to like reinforce our narcissistic defenses. You know, you can call that narcissistic supply. I prefer self-esteem juice. Let's be humanizing, please. I would say the second one would be the identity disturbance. Like, I feel like other people, I don't know who I am if other people aren't telling me who I am, right? So my sense of identity is more or less based off of other people's opinions of me. And I think that should be the second one, because that's also very common. I think the third one should be hiding the self, right? We're so desperate for other people's approval and for them to like us and getting what we need to kind of survive. I would say that hiding our true emotions, hiding our true thoughts and feelings, trying to charm people through basically a facade would be the third one, because we're so ruled by this need to be liked that we're willing to compromise the things that even feel somewhat genuine about us, which is why I just feel like I'm fake and a lie all the time. Everything I do is like that. Fourth, I would say, is hierarchical thinking, right? How do you have a narcissistic defense without ranking people, right? Because it's not, our defenses aren't about self-love. It's about thinking that we're better than people so we can feel good about ourselves, even though we still kind of hate ourselves. So I think that one is very important, because I just don't think that those defenses can function without hierarchical thinking. And then fluctuations in self-esteem, I would say, is number 5. I would say this one gets tricky. I would say under certain circumstances, there will be very severe fluctuations in self-esteem. But somebody can also be more grandiose presenting and basically be doing things in their life that those defenses are really strong, and you won't see those self-esteem fluctuations as often. When I was younger, I don't think anybody really, I had self-esteem fluctuations, but nobody ever saw them really. Every now and then somebody would catch a glimpse, especially if I was like, every now and then if I got into a mood when I was drinking or something like that. But for the most part, people did not see my neuroticism. They didn't see my vulnerable side. And I guess I probably should have clarified this to other people who haven't watched my content, that according to various studies, it's very uncommon for people with narcissistic pathology to only have grandiose traits or only have vulnerable traits. I think one study showed that it was like over 69% of narcissists that were in treatment had both traits. Another study shows that there's a nonlinear correlation between grandiose and vulnerable narcissism, right? They are uncorrelated until you get to the 70th percentile of grandiosity. Then grandiosity and vulnerability very highly correlated. And you could use that 70th percentile kind of as a cutoff for pathology in my mind. And then, so I think those fluctuations of self-esteem are, and then you can see, the arrogance, and then what people would say like the victim kind of complex thing too. Kind of your stereotypical traits that you think about when you think about grandiosity and vulnerability and narcissism. And then a preoccupation with other people's opinions, and also a hyperfixation on that. And I think this is where the lack of empathy comes from, right? We're so fixated on what other people think of us. Like I always say, I'm never thinking about you, I'm thinking of what you think of me. And we're so worried about managing our self-esteem, trying to feel good about ourselves and stuff like that, that we can't really even consider the needs and wants of other people. And that's where the lack of empathy comes in. And I think and that's basically the end of my main symptom criteria. Some people would argue that lack of emotional empathy in general. I don't think that's a core feature of pathological narcissism. The study I referenced earlier showed that only 44% of narcissists lack emotional empathy, which is where my other model, the other thing I was thinking about comes in, where I wanted to make some actual subtypes. And because for me, there's as many presentations of narcissism as there are narcissists, right? But I think that the subtype should be more based off of possible comorbidities or their traits with other cluster B personality disorders. So I basically came up with two. Again, I'm neglecting HPD in this, but I just don't know enough about it for this model. So the first one I would say is the unstable one. This is, for me, characterized by borderline traits, right? Less of a cohesive, false self, right? More identity disturbances. I would argue that there would be more proneness to anger too, because borderlines, that's a symptom criteria for borderlines, is explosive anger. And I feel like because this presentation of narcissism would be a lot more unstable, that you would see those angry outbursts a lot more. And I would say the self-esteem fluctuations would be way more common and way more violent. And even though with narcissists ourselves, our self-esteem fluctuations also mirror our emotional regulation, I would say because of the emotional dysregulation and the self-esteem dysregulation compounding each other, you will see those flip-flops a lot more. And of course, splitting would become way more prominent with borderline personality disorder. It wouldn't just be the hierarchical thinking, and I think in black and white too, all narcissists do. But it would be a lot more prevalent in their interpersonal relationships. Maybe even when their grandiose defenses aren't threatened, or they are close to somebody, or they aren't close to somebody, they might split like that. And I would say on the plus side, these people would probably have a bigger desire for close relationships, a very overt need to be in close relationships. But then that would probably go really badly with some of the narcissistic pathology, where we feel threatened when we feel like our true selves or our vulnerable pieces are exposed. And probably a more overt fear of abandonment. Like a narcissist like myself, if I feel like somebody's going to abandon me, I'm going to cut them out first. I'm like, fuck you, I don't need you anyway. I don't really mean that, but I feel like somebody with more borderline traits might be more overt with preventing abandonment. And then I would say the malignant subtype would be with antisocial traits. I would say, I think the difference between antisocial lack of empathy and the narcissistic one is the narcissistic ones generally, and not always, I do think there is a lot of narcissists. I think this is still a common trait in narcissists, just not as common as people think. But I think with narcissists, it's more a preoccupation with ourselves that we don't even consider the other people. Where with antisocial personality disorder, I think it's more of a genuine, they just lack emotional empathy like that. And again, these traits mix and match all the time. We don't know for sure. But then I would say instead of just kind of the defenses and going on autopilot as a narcissist, the more malignant types with the antisocial traits, they will have a lot more intentionality in their manipulation and stuff like that. And that depends on self-awareness too, right? Some narcissists might be very self-aware, know what their narcissistic functioning is like, and be manipulative on those grounds, but we manipulate for our emotional support, for getting our self-esteem juice. People with ASPD, they are going to manipulate for material gain. So somebody on that scale of malignancy probably will do both. And I want to point out that when I call this the malignant subtype, so to speak, that's kind of a placeholder because, again, like malignant narcissists in themselves, like if we're actually talking about Kernberg's model, that would also include paranoid personality disorder and not paranoid personality disorder, but paranoid traits, and also egosyntonic sadism. Neither of those are diagnostic criteria, right? And then there's going to be more severe boredom. Boredom is actually something that people with antisocial struggle with a lot. Hence why they have this impulsiveness and tendency to commit crimes, is because they want this excitement. They want somebody to just, they just don't want to be bored, right? So you're going to see more, and like all cluster Bs have boredom proneness, but it's way worse in antisocial. And there's going to be more of a lack of fear, more willingness to get into violent encounters. Like for me personally, I will never instigate violence, like ever. Like that sucks. I don't want to do that. I don't want to get hurt. But I feel like some of the antisocial traits is going to be way more willing to instigate something like that. I have gotten into physical altercations when I was younger, like provoked by me, but and there's probably going to be less of like the defenses against this reliance on other people, which narcissists have too. With antisocial traits, it's going to be a lot more ingrained as opposed to my unstable subtype. They're going to show even less of a tendency to want close relationships. Anyways, and I think those are like kind of the only ways to like really encapsulate, like basically how I think the only ways to have subtypes relate is what other traits of cluster B personality disorders do they have? That's going to basically, and because those are going to be the pathological traits, right? And like narcissists, and it's kind of pointless to try to categorize narcissists that just have NPD, because it's like, well, these other traits that kind of show how those people are presenting, they're not pathological. At least that's my opinion on it. Anyways, those are my models of narcissism that I just came up with out of nowhere and decided to share with everybody, that I hope was found insightful and or interesting. But yeah, that's Nameless Narcissist, and let's find the DSM-5 guy and make him adopt my model. Anyways, take your fucking meds, please. Catch you guys later.